Friends, in this lecture, we take drama still further than the discussion that we had earlier, and there are points that people have made, critics have made. Audience is quite important in the sense in which it was not earlier. There is an emphasis on the stage, on directions, and the director is the producer, director is the writer, director uses the script to take the message to the audience, and also at the same time assesses the responses of the audience right there in the hall. So the modern drama then becomes a very compact kind of an activity, which is social in nature, which is realistic in nature, and which allows people space to think differently and to have a different opinion. So all these aspects now would be taken up with a little more systematic sense in which Professor Payal Nagpal earlier discussed drama from the point of view of theory. So over to Professor Payal Nagpal, please share with us your responses.
Thank you, Professor Prakash. So we were discussing naturalism and naturalistic theatre, and it's important to understand that when we talk about realism at the beginning of the 19th century, for instance, what are we really looking at? If we look at Balzacian realism, what Balzac does to the novel is the depiction of the low, the humble, the commonplace, the socially dispossessed, as well as the more prosperous sectors of the society. So he gives us a complete range of people, of characters, people belonging to different segments of the society. And towards the end of the 19th century, Zola raises this question, and he says that only one thing is needed now: men of genius who can fix the naturalistic formula. And he says that Balzac has done it for the novel. When are the playwrights going to do this? And he says we must hope and wait. So if we look at this, he says, he gives us the answer and says, the future is with naturalism. The formula will be found. It will be proved that there is more poetry in the little apartment of a bourgeois than in all the empty, worm-eaten palaces of history. In the end, we will see that everything meets in the real. Now, this is a very important point that we must take with us, which is that it is with naturalistic theatre and naturalistic drama, it's not that it did not have its own limitations, but we have to understand the backdrop against which it emerges, where there was absolutely no talk about, really speaking, engaging with the issues of the times. So, Zola suggests a naturalistic approach, and a playwright like Ibsen takes it up and displays how it is so very important that they move ahead with the idea of a kind of scientific attitude. So now this is an important point. If we look at some key aspects that came in towards the end of the 19th century, one is the scientific impact. With, of course, positivism, determinism, and so on. Towards the end of the 19th century, this idea of a very rational attitude, a scientific attitude, became important. So, at the theatrical level, of course, we saw the integration of setting, costume, lights, gestures. All these were used to create, in a sense, the idea of the real. And, the idea of a very a language that was very specific to theatre was replaced with language of the common people, the spoken language. That became a very important aspect. Costumes were no longer kind of, loud or flamboyant, but costumes were the way people would kind of dress up in their real life. This, in a sense, also led to a whole movement where we had, we spoke about experimentation, and suddenly we had, if you look at the names itself, Theatre Libre or the Free Theatre, a lot of, theatre groups were coming up and experimenting with both writing, form, and of course evolving in the process a new aesthetic of drama. So for instance, André Antois started a new theatrical method, with the Theatre Libre in 1887. of course, we also had, we were talking about the audience and how the audience is looked at in different ways. Now, to begin with, since we've already finished, discussing this first movement, which is of naturalism, how is the audience perceived here is an important question. The audience is understood to be an entity that exists outside the theatrical space. There is, as the term was coined by Jean Julien, the fourth wall. So there is a fourth wall, which is the invisible wall, and the audience is seated outside of this. And they have to be given the illusion that whatever they are watching is real. So this also, in a sense, became illusionistic theatre. So, if we look at some other aspects and some other, theatre groups, for instance, apart from Theatre Libre, there was the Tribune, there was the Independent Theatre in London, and of course we had the Moscow Art Theatre. So, if we look at, and just to share a sentence from Otto Brum's Free Theatre, he says, "We are launching a free stage for modern life. Art shall be the object of our strivings, the new art which fixes its attention on reality and contemporary existence." So we can see how an association with the real, to look at things as they are, and the real here means the real social lives, the lived lives of people, and contemporary existence. So all this happened, just at the turn of the century, and from naturalism we move to another very important moment, which is that of, there are other aspects, of course, that come in, of emotion and so on. And Richard Boleslavsky from the Moscow Art Theatre actually brings this in and says, we have a special memory for feelings. And his lectures on theatre, he explains this, that in every artist, it is this idea of the emotion and experience that, is an essential part of our life and craft. So, this, I think, is, again, very, very important for us to understand how gradually, as, we moved into the 20th century, the idea of expressionism became important. And if you look at the turn of the century, this is pretty much the period with a lot of isms, right, from futurism to surrealism and impressionism and so on. And each group is actually kind of, all these avant-garde movements that are ahead of their time, indicate how this is a period, Professor Prakash used the term of modernism. And modernism is the blanket term within which so much of, these avant-garde impulses are, really evolving and developing concrete form. And all these are also movements that do have an impact on theatre, on the way in which a play is written and the way in which a play is performed, the way in which a play is perceived. Now, with naturalism, we looked at almost a kind of passive role that is attributed, that is given to the audience. We now move to epic theatre that gives a more vital, dynamic and active role to the audience. So, and how do we arrive at this? Of course, there are playwrights like Gerhard Hauptmann, whose plays, for instance, The Weavers, based on the event of the revolt of the Silesian weavers of 1844, it exposed the pathetic condition of the weavers at the hands of the owners who enjoyed the surplus. Now, this is a play that is again, towards the end of the 19th century, but we connect this with a lot of activist theatre, political theatre of, the 1920s and 30s. So where we have Piscator, we have Bertolt Brecht, they experiment with this and they come up. Brecht gives us the idea of epic theatre. With of course Piscator, we have more of documentary theatre, but with Bertolt Brecht, we are looking at a very important moment where the audience is absolutely active and the audience is vital, and the audience is now expected to watch the play as a play, not as a slice of reality, but as a play that they are watching. So, and he is very, very critical of naturalistic drama and the way in which it converts the audience into a passive entity. And I'll quote Brecht here. He says, "Let us go into one of these houses and observe the effect which it has on the spectators. Looking about us, we see somewhat motionless figures in a peculiar condition. They seem strenuously to be tensing their muscles, except where they are flabby and exhausted. They scarcely communicate with each other. Relations are a lot of sleepers." So in short, what Brecht is telling us is how these people, the audience that is, the people who come to watch a play, are looking at the play in a very, very passive way. And Bertolt Brecht, in a sense, revitalizes not only the role that is given to the audience, but the entire aesthetic of theatre itself. Where, in epic theatre, the idea is that the audience should watch a play as a play and should be able to observe the issues that are raised, and through techniques like the alienation effect and so on, the use of jest, that is a kind of socially rooted gesture on stage, should allow the audience to give different points of view and to discuss the issues that are explained. There is no linear movement. There is no culmination of an ending of sorts, but it is about questions that are being raised. And here I'd request Professor Prakash, who himself is an expert on epic theatre, to share his views on this transformation and this second very key moment for us to understand drama of the 20th century.
Well, you already said the essential aspect of heroic drama, and one can take off from there. And the moment one brings in heroic theatre, heroic drama or epic drama, one thinks of the 20th century, specifically the two world wars, when people in the villages, people in the small towns, people all over Europe as people, not as upper classes or middle classes, they were the worst hit, and they were supposed to have a voice, and they didn't have a voice. The literature of the time was modernistic in the sense that they focused upon experience, but these people were dumb, listeners to or watchers of and witness to all the things that were happening around them. And then somebody had to come in and give a voice to the common masses. And who are the common masses? I would believe, and of course the idea is yours, that the common people actually have to play a role, and an active role. And real heroism is not the heroism of the old type where people fought wars and they brought laurels to the country or to the community or to the society. But real heroes are those who deal with ideas, their own ideas, and who connect those ideas with other ideas so that they can share a kind of vision that will be change oriented. So that's a new kind of heroism. And I agree with you that this kind of theatre is more concerned with the simple problems, apparently simple looking problems, but problems that affect life at a on a vaster scale. And this heroism is to be explored further. And in fact, epic theatre has become more important in the 1960s and 70s after Bertolt Brecht. And people have become more activist. They ask the audience questions. They ask the audience to come to the stage and assume certain roles. And then, the audience may or may not be, coming to the expectations of the writer. But at least the audience knows that the play done on the stage actually belongs to them. So that, I believe, is a movement towards heroism of a new kind in our own time.
Which is so true, and you brought in such an important element of heroic drama, which is the heroism here is of the common masses, is of the people. There is nothing, and in that sense, from the ancient to the modern period, we've covered such a distance where heroism belongs in that sense to the common people, and they are the ones who have to be represented on stage, and it's their requirements and their problems that should find creative representation, so that these issues can be looked at not just as an experience, but issues for which we can find answers, or at least raise questions. And I think with Brecht, what also happens is that the whole point about the connection between literature and life, I think that acquires a kind of new form, new meaning. What would you say about that?
No, because already you have taken part in these plays, you have been an actor in the plays. So in fact, I would like to know about the role of the poem, role of the song in modern theatre, particularly of the heroic kind. So how does song connect? All actors burst into a song on the stage, and then it happens that perhaps the song belongs as much to the actors, as much to the characters as to the audience.
It's a very, very pertinent question, and I would answer this from an actor's point of view and not from the audience's point of view. As a performer on stage, and I think most of the plays I performed in were scripted by you. So what would also happen is that suddenly, if there is a tense moment, in performance, I think the break comes with the song. And the song is not simply, of course, it gives the performer that moment to kind of transform to, let's say, another mood, another emotion. But more importantly, it gives the performer, as it also gives the audience, a chance to distance herself from what she has just performed. And that, of course, is something that I think would come very gradually, with a lot of engagement with theatre of this sort. So it gives you that break to understand what you have just performed, and at the same time, the moment you join the chorus, you become as much of an observer as is the audience towards that particular moment where you have probably been involved in a very, very serious mood, so to say. So that, I think, is the idea of alienation is something that is very significant, not just for the audience, but is also important for the actors, to be able to also assess one's role and to observe that. And that only happens when this kind of distancing is provided through a poem, through the songs particularly. Now, with the poem again, the poem can be used to both effects. To really speaking, think about, one could use a poem to communicate with the audience, to think about, the plot or the role that one is performing. And at the same time, the poem could also be an epilogue, let's say, at the end of a play, commenting on the play itself. That is also a possibility. I mean, if we really speaking think about Brecht's The Good Person of Szechuan, we can see that it ends with an epilogue. And in fact, interestingly, I had the lines here that, ladies and gentlemen, don't feel let down. We know this ending makes some people frown. There is only one solution that we know, that you should now consider. What sort of measures would you recommend to help good people to a happy end? So there is no ending. And, it ends with, ladies and gentlemen, in you we trust. There must be a happy ending, must. So it's left to the audience. So this could well be converted into a poem at the end of a play. So both the poem and the songs, which are very, very central to epic theatre, allow us to really speaking execute in a sense this idea, this aesthetic that makes space for alienation, which is only a means to actually observe and ask questions and to think, is there a possibility for any other kind of ending? Can we do it differently? And I'm sure that as many people in the audience, as many ways of looking at possible solutions. The point is that theatre before this had not urged them, had not pushed them to think about the solutions. It is with playwrights like Bertolt Brecht that this idea of addressing the problem, of asking questions about the problem, is something that materializes.
Tell us something about Jean Genet, because you have worked intensively on Jean Genet, and he is an activist theatre person, writing in the 50s and later perhaps. And say something about him. Share your thoughts with the audience, because he is also one of the important voices of modern drama.
Yes. So, well, I think I'd like to talk about Jean Genet more in the context of the theatre of the absurd, and which functions as a kind of blanket term in which playwrights like Genet are also included, and so on. Now, it's very problematic, and my own contention has been that absurd theatre, this idea of nothingness, this idea of stasis in life, which was pretty much there, must have been especially in the post Second World War scenario, in the 1950s. A lot of playwrights are actually, they focus on this. We have, of course, Samuel Beckett, and we have Eugene Ionesco. These playwrights are, concentrating on this idea of the absurdity, so to say, of life itself. I look at Jean Genet here in a slightly different way, because his plays do not really conform to this idea of the absurd, but they combine, I would say, the elements of the absurd with a kind of solid Brechtian tradition before him. And for instance, the use of the epilogue, the use of the idea how in a play like The Balcony, with the protagonist Irma kind of addressing the audience directly. Now, is that Irma addressing the audience, or is it an actor playing Irma addressing the audience, or is it simply any actor addressing the audience?
Or the playwright.
Or the playwright. So this is something that does not belong, really speaking, to the absurd tradition, but lies more within, the Brechtian tradition that we've been talking about. But yes, with this we actually come to the third moment, which is that of absurd theatre, where we have one of the most famous plays is, of course, Waiting for Godot by Samuel Beckett. The idea of stasis, of waiting, with two certitudes of life and its end. But what we do within this, that is the question that is being raised, and it's almost as if there is this endless waiting. But this is a very solid critique, in a sense, of the kind of development that has been suggested, really speaking, especially in the context of the First World, that this kind of developmental model has collapsed. It does not work. And I think the stasis has to be understood as a product of this idea of development, which has only led to world wars, and which has led to complete destruction of humanity, of humankind. And it's also, in a sense, that moment where one must pause and look back at what have the gains been, really speaking. And when one looks at that, one arrives at some zero, that there are no gains, which is why this idea of the absurd becomes very important.
How will you conclude your discussion with the 3 or 4 sentences?
So I think today, in the context of modern drama, we laid emphasis and we analyzed the term modern itself, and the element of modernity in the 20th century. We also looked at 3 broad movements, the naturalistic, the epic or heroic drama. We looked at the element of the absurd and absurd theatre. But along with this, as I said, that these are 3 broad movements, we also have different movements happening. There was a different movement happening in India, for instance, a country struggling for freedom, a very important movement of the IPTA that took place in India. And at the same time, we have a very important movement of theatre in America with Eugene O'Neill and Arthur Miller, and then, of course, Tennessee Williams. So, but at the same time, these broad movements help us understand modernity, help us understand modern drama, and it helps us understand the connections, between these different aesthetics taking place and acquiring concrete shape and form in different countries.
So friends, we have had a virtual feast of ideas and perceptions from Professor Payal Nagpal, and she has thrown light on the developments in drama, development in theatre, vis-a-vis the larger scene of society and politics that surrounds the activity. And I'm sure that you will be thinking about these issues yourself in your self-study and reach your own conclusions in the true dramatic sense. Thank you.